Selma hadn't meant to stop in Fallow Ridge. She was just passing through, riding the same wagon she'd bought with her late husband's pension, and whatever silver hadn't been pried from her trunk by his brothers. But when the wheel snapped outside the saloon, and the townsman offered laughter instead of help, she saw the cage. It sat in the middle of the square like a spectacle. Iron bars rusted at the base, straw scattered on the floor, and inside a man slumped against the wall with his head bowed low. He didn't speak, didn't move. It was barefoot, shirt torn, wrists wrapped in makeshift cuffs. Someone had scrolled $10 to touch the beast on a board nailed to the side. A boy threw a rock at the cage. It hit the bars and bounced back. The man didn't flinch. Selma climbed down from her wagon slowly. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins for days, but she moved toward the commotion like she'd been summoned. A cluster of locals hooted and jeered as the sheriff leaned against the post, whittling something. "What's he done?" Selma asked quietly. The sheriff barely glanced at her. "Nothing we can prove, but he won't talk." Came out the hills carrying another man's saddlebag and bleeding like a stuck hog. Couldn't they explain himself, so he let the folks make use of him. "Is he dangerous?" she asked. "To who?" The sheriff smirked. "A woman like you." That was when the man in the cage lifted his head. Not fully, just enough that Selma saw his eyes. Not wild, not begging, just watching like someone long past hoping, but not yet broken. She stepped forward until her boots met the edge of the cage. The town grew quiet behind her. "Does he have a name?" she asked. "None we can get out of him." Calls himself nothing. The man kept staring. She didn't look away. Her fingers twitched at her side. She thought of the ring. It still sat in her coin pouch. The one thing she hadn't pawned. Her wedding ring. Seen gold smoothed from years of wear. A relic of a man who never came back from the war. She told herself she'd trade it for nothing. Until now. She reached into her satchel, felt the cool metal between her fingers, and pulled it free. The crowd leaned in. Selma stepped to the sheriff, held the ring up. "Will this be what he is?" she asked. The man behind the bars didn't blink. But in that moment, Selma knew. She wasn't buying a man. She was setting something free in both of them. The sheriff took the ring with a smirk and held it to the sunlight like he was weighing a horse, not a man. "Ain't they worth $10, he said. "But it'll make for a fine tale." The crowd chuckled, not knowing whether to jeer or applaud. Selma didn't flinch. She watched as the sheriff unlocked the cage with a rusted iron key and let it fall open with a screech that made dogs bark in the distance. The man inside didn't move. "He's yours now," the sheriff said. "Hope you've got rope and regrets." Selma stepped forward, pausing just outside the cage. "You can come or stay," she said. "Either way, you're not anyone's anymore." Still, the man didn't rise. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up, hands braced against his knees, legs stiff like they hadn't moved in weeks. He stood tall, taller than she expected. Sunlight hit his face full now. Dark hair matted, beard thick, eyes shadowed and unreadable. Not young, not old, not a monster, just worn. He stepped out without a word. The crowd parted as he passed. Selma beside him, her back straight though her heart pounded in her chest like hooves. She climbed onto the wagon. He climbed in back. No one stopped them. No one spoke. The wheels creaked as they pulled away. Selma didn't look back. They rode east of Ridge wound through sparse pine and dusty fields. She kept her eyes ahead, hands steady on the reins. The men didn't ask where they were going. Didn't they ask for food or water? Didn't they ask anything at all? When the sun dipped low, she stopped at a hollow where a stream cut through the rocks and let the horse drink. The men jumped down before she could speak, untied the pack without prompting, and began gathering wood. By the time she'd unhitched the horse and unpacked the blankets, he had a fire going, a smile, tight, efficient. Selma watched him crouch beside it, quiet as the trees around them. "Do you have a name?" she asked. He looked at her, then shook his head once. "Can you speak?" he nodded. "But you don't." A pause, then a shrug. She sighed, settling on a nearby stone. I'm not looking for a husband or a worker or a story to pity. He looked up, brow raised. She met his gaze, firm, but tired. I bought you because you didn't deserve that cage, not because I need anything from you. He didn't reply, but he reached into the firelight, tore a piece of his own bread in two, and offered her half. No words, just a gesture. And somehow that was the loudest thing either of them had said all day. They traveled for 3 days without incident, camping near rivers and beneath low trees where crows circled but never called. Selma kept the wagon on old trader trails, the kind her husband had once marked on maps in pencil and prayer. The mountain man, still unnamed, never strayed far from camp. He slept near the fire, but never too close, cooked without being told, gathered wood before she noticed the pile had shrunk. And each morning, without asking, he made sure the wheels were sound. It was an unspoken rhythm, like a dance without music. Selma didn't ask for more. But one evening, as dusk turned the sky to bruised lilac, she watched him carve something into a piece of dry cedar with a rusted knife. He sat cross-legged by the fire, bare forearms wrapped in linen from her sewing kit. She hadn't offered it. He'd taken only what he needed. That fact oddly comforted her. "What are you making?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first, then turned the carving toward her. A simple wolf, long legs, sharp snout, tail arched. "You?" she asked. He shook his head, then pointed to her. She laughed, not cruelly. "You think I'm a wolf?" He nodded once with certainty. "You know, wolves get shot out here," she said. "Most folks call them thieves." He tapped the figure again, then pointed to the sky. Selma followed his gesture. "Stars cold and silver, and a half-moon rising. Do you think I came from there?" He shrugged, but his eyes said yes. "A creature too stubborn to die, too silent to beg." She stared at the carving a long moment, then reached into her satchel and pulled out the empty ring pouch, the one that used to hold her wedding band. She tied it shut with a piece of string and placed it on the fire's edge. "Seems like we're both unclaimed now," she murmured. He watched the pouch smolder, never interrupting. When she looked back at him, he wasn't staring at the fire. He was watching her, not with hunger, not with pity, with something steadier, like the ground itself had eyes. "Did you ever belong to anyone?" she asked. He pressed a hand to his chest, then slowly shook his head. She nodded. "Maybe that's for the best." The fire crackled soft and low. The wolf figure sat between them now, unburned, unfinished. And in that moment, the quiet wasn't empty. It was sacred. Something passed between them that didn't need to be spoken, just held. They reached the edge of the canyon on the 5th day, where the cliffs broke open, and the wind stopped pretending to be kind. Selma pulled the wagon beneath an overhang, and stared at the narrow trail ahead. Barely wide enough for the horse, much less a wagon and 2 lives, trying not to fall. The mountain man stood beside her, arms folded, hair tied back with the same bit of leather he'd used to strap down their supplies. He didn't look nervous. He looked ready. "You've done this before," she said. He gave a small nod. "You want to lead?" Another nod. She smiled faintly. "You're not much of a talker, but you sure know when to say yes." She handed him the reins without flinching. Trust, she realized, didn't always come in full. Sometimes it slipped in quiet, one breath at a time. He took the horse's lead and walked with a careful gait, every step measured. Selma followed on foot beside the wagon, hand steady on the frame. The cliff dropped off into nothing, and her throat tightened at every gust of wind, but the man never faltered. At a bend in the trail, a rattling spooked the horse. The beast reared, kicking, and Selma nearly lost her grip. The wagon groaned. Then his hand on the bridle, calm, grounded. The horse stilled. "Used like that," he said nothing. Used looked back once to make sure she was still upright. Her heart thudded in her ribs. Not from the near fall, but from the way he looked at her, like she wasn't something fragile, like she was already standing. That night, they camped near a small spring tucked behind cedar trees. He made stew with salted meat and boiled herbs she didn't recognize. As they ate, she studied him, the way he always faced outward, eyes on the dark, watching for trouble, even if it never came. "You don't sleep much," she said. He shrugged. Is it fear? He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. She tried again. Guilt? Still? No. Then he did something unexpected. He reached for the knife at his hip and dragged its hilt slowly across the ground. 2 lines, then another across. A shape. A caje, she whispered. Nadie, then scratched a single line through it. Gone. She stared at the lines at him, at the fire between them. Then maybe it's not fear keeping you up, she said softly. Maybe it's just habit. He didn't reply, but when she stood and turned the bed, she felt the braid of her hair shift over her shoulder, and the cord that tied it had been replaced with twine. Braided, silent, his. She found the mirror by accident, cracked and half-wrapped in linen at the bottom of her pack. She hadn't touched it since before the war took her husband, since before her hair turned darker with ash, and her face learned stillness as a shield.